Hello, everyone, and a happy new year. Welcome back to the podcast. It's been a really good few weeks. Apart from I somehow managed to get COVID, which wasn't great over Christmas, but it is out there. Uh, yeah, I hope you've all had a good festive break and good start to the new year. And to kickstart the new year in traditional style now on the show, we're focusing today on the Oxford Farming Conference and the Oxford Real Farming Conference, both of which took place online last week, due, of course, to the pandemic. First up, we're going to focus on OFC, and I'm thrilled to be joined by next year's chair of the OFC Council, who I have to say I didn't actually know that she was going to be before I actually booked her on for this interview. So that was quite good luck, actually. Emily Norton, back-to-back podcast episodes for you, Emily. Thank you so much for coming on after the great quiz of last year.
I fully expect to now be an answer to the quiz in next year's Christmas quiz.
That could happen. I mean, when we saw each other then, we were still hopeful that we'd be meeting in Oxford itself and the conference would still be face to face. That probably was quite hopeful at the time. But I mean, how difficult was it making that decision to go online?
It really was incredibly difficult. In comparison to the year before, we'd always planned to have a virtual conference. So all of the planning had got into kind of, creating that platform and the digital platform, which was all a bit like, online networking and the best that we could make it. This year was unplanned. It was a last minute decision where we were looking at the data. Like everybody else, we were looking for a government steer on how things were going to go. And it just wasn't coming. And so the parameters around which we were trying to make that decision were, can we keep people safe? And actually, Ben, as you've shown, loads of people have really awfully come down with COVID over Christmas. So, there was some reputational concern if Oxford itself had turned into a horrible super spreader event.
Yeah.
And actually, so many people would have been isolating. So that would have been it. That would have really kind of like been the dampener on getting people together and that whole point of getting people together. So it was a really difficult decision, but I think with hindsight, absolutely the right one to do.
Yeah, let's go through some of the sessions now. Let's turn to the UK politics session first. We were joined by George Eustice, Secretary of State for DEFRA, Leslie Griffiths, Rural Affairs Minister in Wales, and Edwin Poots, Agriculture Minister in Northern Ireland. It was interesting to see, I think, the beginning of how the various national ag policies might differ slightly, perhaps. What was your take on it?
Yeah, I think so. But actually, the most interesting one who wasn't there was the Scottish angle.
That was quite noted, I think.
It was quite noted, wasn't it? Not for want of trying. Everybody was busy. In my mind, there's sort of like two major differentiators going into policy at the moment within the devolved nations. One is the extent to which food is or is not present within these policies, and the second is the extent to which climate is or is not present within these policies at the moment. And the Scottish policies very overtly, the beginnings that we see of it are very overtly about climate and climate adaptation and climate mitigation. Whereas English policy, in my mind, still isn't really about food or climate. It's just about the environment and this blob that is kind of this focus on the environmental land management. So obviously all of the news went into what George Eustice was saying about local nature recovery schemes and the increased funding for countryside stewardship, all of which is brilliant, but doesn't really tell us how businesses are supposed to survive.
Yeah.
In comparison, the Welsh and the Scots, but the Welsh in particular, very much around the sustainable farming incentive and kind of the sustainable farming scheme and how that supports food production and Welsh food production, and that idea of the fabric of the Welsh economy, which is knitted into food and landscapes. So I do think that those differences as they emerge are going to be increasingly stark. What I think from an Oxford perspective is most interesting is how you get those individuals along to conference to talk about these things without it being well, you're doing it different to me, You don't want debate. We've got so much more of a shared experience that we need to be championing, particularly on a global stage. And so bringing those individuals together to talk about national agricultural policies, I think, it's not a given that that's the way that we need to do in the future.
Carbon, everyone's favourite subject at the moment. That was the focus in the Frank Parkinson lecture, which this year is delivered by Professor Sarah Bridle, who looked at different foods and their contribution in climate change. This was clearly put into to challenge delegates' thinking, I'm assuming?
I think carbon and the way that we think about carbon as a sector within land, within our economy and within our consumers is still a really emerging subject.
Yeah.
And what isn't clear is kind of where the locus of responsibility sits. And so part of the problem is that everybody thinks it's somebody else's problem. So, within food, we're like, well, it's up to consumers to choose what they want. Within supply chains, probably just saying we want to give people choice to kind of like make these ideas. Within farming, we're saying, well, somebody's going to pay us maybe to store carbon within our landscapes. And actually, that's why one of the primary reasons why we really wanted to push the Oxford Farming Conference report this year, which looks at the emerging dynamics of agri-carbon and carbon markets and how those power dynamics might play out. So one of my biggest concerns is that supply chains need net zero farms as a condition of market access. So, you won't be able to supply milk to your supermarket buyers, your supermarket supply chain, unless you can prove that you're a net zero business. Yeah. How, the cost of that, the power dynamics of that, the investment that's needed in order to get the space, the physical space and infrastructure of farms, we haven't thought through any of those things yet. And so having that kind of conversation around where the power dynamics sit, what's accepted, what is the right kind of landscape for farming to be net zero and to meet consumers' expectations of net zero really is not just a conversation for this year, but a conversation we need to have for several years as these pieces of the puzzle begin to slot into place.
One of my moments at the conference was definitely Zana's session, Zana Joyce's presentation. That was particularly moving during the Inspiring Farmer session, which is it tends to always be mine, and I know a lot of other people's favourite session. One thing I didn't watch, which I'm hoping to get on, is there some sort of catch up? Was the Ellen MacArthur session? I missed it.
Yes, there will be a catch up. Confession time, I missed it too. But okay. She was awesome. And just talking about this idea. So again, Ben, I suppose one of the key things that I'm really interested in is not, what we do at the moment within farms is this sort of legacy of the last sort of 70 years of policy. Where we tend to see everything that we do through this kind of paradigm that this is what we do. But actually within the broader economy and society more generally, there's this massive macroeconomic shift going on from a fossil fuel economy to a post-fossil fuel economy. Yeah. And so understanding kind of what we sort of think is normal practice now and how that normal practice won't be normal as we view it in 15 or 20 years time is really, really important. And I think what Ellen MacArthur does in sort of talking about the circular economy, we absolutely get that within farming. We're all about kind of, using a balanced rotation, using animals within an arable system in order to kind of avoid wastage at any time. It's when we sort of extract the products from the system off into these linear consumer-based supply chains that sort of things go wrong, if you're not then recapturing the value that's sort of lost from the system at the end of it. So her thinking is critical because it might not kind of make sense now as we view things now, but if you imagine where we're going to be 5, 10, 15, 20 years time in terms of our availability of plastics, our availability of chemicals, our availability of fossil fuels in particular, and energy, all of that stuff quite quickly will shift to something different. And so understanding the new paradigm that we need to consider our viability through is really important. And that's why Ellen, I think, is brilliant.
Yeah. And then bringing that back to Oxford, your tagline, Inform, Challenge, Inspire. Do you feel that as a group of directors, I think you did, but do you feel that as a group of directors, you achieved that this year?
I really hope so. I really hope so. So we started with this idea that policy is kind of telling us we need to get bigger or we need to get niche, right? Yeah. So that, diversify, find your USP, kind of, routes to market, add value at farm gate, capture more value at farm gate, collaborate, communities, whatever it might be. There's this push towards diversity, which is not wrong. There's also this kind of, okay, we'll get bigger, get more efficient, get more intensive, get specialists in to help you, where's the overhead for that going to come from? And it was this idea of this divergence between these two systems as we see policy evolve in front of us that I thought was really important that we kind of shine a light on. this idea of family farming that sits within it, this sort of nugget of value that's protected at the moment by the income support payments we get from the Common Agricultural Policy, is it defensible? Is that the kind of, thing that we should be saying, no, you've got to kind of support us because we are family farming and that's what we do here in this country. So it's sort of morphed into this sort of idea, well, how do we create these routes to resilience? The routes to resilience for farming businesses in light of all of these changes that are going on. And I think that really became the bedrock of understanding the focus on mental health. You referenced Zana Joyce there from the Inspiring Farmers session, and his focus on kind of defending the model of farming, bringing in additional skills, admitting when you're not the best person to do something, you might need somebody else. All of these different futures are available to us. And I think understanding that resilience is the bit that says we can cope with these changes and that we can adapt and thrive is really critical. So we've had fantastic feedback, which is great because it really is our conference. This is what I said in my closing speech. It's not just us throwing out ideas. This has to be something that everybody goes, okay, that's where we want to be for these conversations. And that, in my mind, is the biggest single indicator of success. If people say, yeah, we left that conference thinking and feeling something positive, then that's got to be the best indicator of success that we could ask for.
As you said there, you closed this year's conference, as you are, of course, chair for next year's event. There's obviously a lot of work to do first, and I'm sure that your fellow directors and yourself will have plenty of ideas for where you could go. But is there anything that you can share with us at this point about possible content or themes, or are we still way too early days?
We're probably a little bit too early yet. We're actually getting together just this week in order to kind of review some of this stuff, which I think is really important. As I said again in my closing speech, there are two key priorities for this year. The first one is making sure that what we do next year is done safely and that we can actually get people together, because it's great that people enjoyed conference, but it is also conference in broadcast mode. And, you can watch YouTube, you can find speakers out there and kind of, what you need to have is those unexpected serendipitous conversations that really add value to how you think about stuff. And if we can't get people together safely, then we do lose that value. And I think understanding the possibilities, understanding where we might be able to do that in a slightly different way, but to ensure that we get people together safely for those conversations, that's the number one priority. The second priority is just embedding inclusivity. And from that perspective, there's a lot about the value of the digital offering, ensuring that people can get to conference and participate wherever they are from or whatever their personal constraints are, but without, again, losing that value of making sure you're having really good conversations. So somehow ensuring that we can get as many people who are interested in the future of farming together safely and embedding those two elements together really is absolutely critical. So we've got some massive decisions to try and make in order to ensure that we can do this in the right way for everybody. Yeah. And I think that's probably about as much as I can say. Yeah. I wish it was obvious. I really do wish it was obvious. But unfortunately, the curveballs that this new sort of paradigm throws at us is so difficult to predict. So we just need to make sure for ourselves that we've got some resilience within the conference format.
Thank you so much, Emily. And best of luck for next year. I'm sure that it'll be with us before we know it. Next up, I'm speaking to Sam Siva about the Oxford Real Farming Conference. Sam, welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for coming on to talk about ORFC. Can you, first of all, just introduce yourself to the listeners?
Hi, I'm Sam Siva. I'm part of Land in Our Names, a land justice and racial justice collective working towards land reparations in Britain. I'm also part of the Right to Learn campaign with Guy Shrubsole and Nick Hayes. And I'm a writer and a grower in my spare time when I was gonna say,
all that spare time. Yeah. when you get it. Of course, the conference was online this year. We're still obviously hopeful that at some point we'll all be able to come together actually in the same space. But again, with that online format, we had a huge amount going on. Delegates could step in and out of different topic areas, and everything was recorded as well, so you can go in again. But yeah, so we were online. What was your take generally on the conference as a whole? Were there any particular sessions that you particularly enjoyed, and specifically on that online format as well? How well do you think that worked?
Last year, so 2021, it was all online and it was spread over several days, which I think really worked better than this year, which was very like last minute online, and like it was sort of, you only had like 2 days or 2.5 days to really watch sessions or participate. And I think that can, especially being on Zoom a lot, I think it can be quite fatiguing. So it was nice last year that it was spread out over a week, but obviously that couldn't happen this year because it was so last minute. So I think it was sad that it couldn't happen in person, but COVID is still, not great here. So I think people did what they could, and I thought the platform that ORFC used was really accessible and really dynamic. So that was quite cool. It was different from last year as well. And you could like save the things that you want to go to your agenda, and it was great because Lion like programmed a room with shared assets, the justice room. So that was really exciting to have like a space dedicated to the justice element of land and food growing in Britain. And so that was really exciting to hear about what Josina, my colleague, was working with the shared assets lot to like put together a really exciting, really dynamic program. And so I was quite excited by a lot of things in the justice room. There was a lot of really cool like well-being things like meditation, and as well as some really great conversations. And I'm just excited to like watch all the things I missed, because I didn't have as much stamina to go to everything I wanted to. So what's great about ORFC as well is that because it's online, they can then upload everything that was recorded to YouTube, and then it's just there archived or available. So I'm looking forward to watching some stuff back as well.
I was going to say, I think probably like last year, I think it took a little bit of time, understandably, last year to get everything up on YouTube, but I know the team will be working through it, and all those will be available. So you personally spoke at a few sessions. So was this your first time as a speaker?
It was my first time as a speaker. Last year, I facilitated a closed workshop with 2 other people in Lion for Black and people of color. And it was really, really great. And we talked about reparations and healing and stuff like that. And then this year it was mainly speaking. And I really love the reflections on the roots into food growing report session, because Pauline, who's been leading the Roots into Food Growing project, has a lot of really great ideas about how this project can build, especially as it's looking at system change. Like the report that Lion wrote highlighted a lot of the issues that Black and people of color within London who are wanting to pursue food growing face. And now we have like these recommendations, like having a union, having networks, having people who have influence with councils or access to land and resources to support Black and people of color to access that. And it was really great because Luke B from Willowbrook Farm, he is putting together a training course at his farm, and they're like a halal organic farm, and just having the opportunity to, if that's what you want to pursue, so that you can like learn that in place. And then they're really good friends. And Harry Biles, who's looking to set up a farm workers union, which is really exciting, because I think the issue within the organic and agroecological growing movement here is that it's not led by workers. It's like a coalition between workers and landowners, which means that workers' rights are often forgotten. So or like, put to the back burner. And it's really exciting that this is happening. And I'm looking, and so it was just cool to just feel like, oh, a year has passed and so much has happened, and there's so many exciting directions we're going on. And the Land and the Race in Empire session with Corinne Fowler was really great. I've been reading her book green and unpleasant land. There was a couple of trolls in the chat, but
Okay.
it was great to ignore them, and there was a lot of really supportive people, and I really Corinne Fowler is just a really great writer and researcher and academic, and it's just great to have people also fighting for recognizing how the countryside within this country is often whitewashed and like the history is often forgotten. So it's really great to have so many people looking to correct that, and how that connects with our work as anti-racist and land justice collective looking at reparation, but also how that connects for farm workers and people who are growing food, if they want to like incorporate justice, if they really want to change things, if they really think this is the way to achieve climate justice, the way to like better people's lives, like how we need to acknowledge and like work to understand our histories as well. Yeah, I had a really great time in those sessions, and I was just really inspired and energized.
In terms of action points, I suppose for the year ahead, and that's something that Oxford Real's very good at, I think, especially when we used to be face to face. But there was very much a feeling that it's the beginning of the year. These are the certain things that we want to focus on this year. What for you, if we were sitting together at the end of the year, looking back on this year, if the sustainable food and farming movement, the agroecological food movement, could have achieved one thing, what would it be?
I think having more value for workers' rights and making it like actually a viable career path for people, because the fact is that a lot of people can't afford to live on farm worker salaries. It's quite difficult. So like having like a union, creating those like, you know, getting closer towards having a greater value towards workers' rights, and how that will intersect with like gender, sexuality, race, class, like all of these things. It will make it a lot more accessible and like less about, you know, just we're willing to sacrifice our comfort and well-being for this thing because we think it's good and it's like a virtue. And so I would love that if that's something that gets a lot of like support, funding, momentum, is like setting up like a really great union that helps people stay as farm workers so they can pursue it, so they don't have to hopefully find land or become tenant farmers, which doesn't necessarily mean that you're any more stable in your income or anything.
Will you be going to the conference again next year? And if you do you reckon we'll be, it's an impossible question, isn't it? But yeah, do you reckon we'll be face to face, or do you reckon we'll be online again next year?
I really hope it's face to face. I haven't been to ORFC in person, so it'd be really great if it's face to face. So I'm really hopeful for that. But yeah, you know, you just have to see how it goes and be grateful that things are so accessible now, that people come. Like a lot of the sessions that we did, there were people from like the States or from the countries who came to like see what was going on, and that's really exciting, that international solidarity and interest that can build from there. And so I think even if it is in person, I hope that it continues to have online sessions, that there are ways that people can tune in or watch them back, that it still remains like an accessible space and conference.
Yeah. And finally, what will you take away from your experience this year?
Everything is changing. Like the real like food and farm growing space was quite white in the past few years, but I'm not past few years, but before my time anyway. And then I feel that's dramatically changed in the past couple of years. And I think that's really heartwarming to come back and then to see that there's a lot more speakers and workshops and activities that are like Black and people of color who are based in Britain as well, who are British, you know, delivering talks, talking about their experience, that it's not just lying, that it's not just a few individuals who've always been there. It's like there's new people, and then from that, like who else will get involved? What's the next? Will it be somewhere that's a lot more like trans affirmative? There'll be a lot more like representation of LGBT people as well? Like, is that something, how will the conference change? And that's something I'm in a way that it's changed and it's going to keep changing.
Sam, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been really, really, really interesting to get your perspective on Oxford Real. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. Next time, I'm really excited to say that I'll be joined by Janet Hughes, who is the Programme Director for the Future Farming and Countryside Programme at DEFRA. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do like and subscribe wherever you're listening. That really helps to let others know about the show. And I hope you can join me next time for my chat with Janet. But until then, have a great week.